Nathaniel Raymond there from the Yale School of Public Health. And US President Donald Trump's new security strategy has raised questions about US relations with Europe. The scathing assessment takes European countries to task for continuing to rely on the US for defence. Deutsche Welle correspondent Stephen Beardsley joins us now from Berlin. Stephen, g'day. So what's the reaction been from the past few days over Europe?
Yeah, that's right, Joe. You know, Europe is not unaccustomed to having disputes with this administration, usually over issues such as trade, such as military burden sharing, as you mentioned. But the past few days have really cast a much darker shadow over the continent, over its relationship with Europe, because in a sense, it's confirming some of the worst case views that many here have when it comes to European leaders. And that is when you look at this kind of rushed attempt at a Ukrainian ceasefire that many European leaders would say ignores European concerns, borrows a lot of talking points from the Kremlin. When you look at this strategy review, as you mentioned, a lot of language there borrowed directly from populist parties here that are gaining ground. And then you look at this interview on Tuesday that Trump gave, in which he again repeated this idea of Europe decaying. Now, we do see that European leaders are trying to be very careful in their language and how they respond to this. We saw that the EU's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas, saying that, look, she still sees the alliance as being strong. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz saying that some of the complaints are understandable, while he would dispute others. There is more pressure at home for them to use stronger language, and perhaps in private they might echo what we hear from Kaja's predecessor, Josep Borrell. He tweeted on Tuesday that it's time for the EU to realize that the US has essentially become an adversary in its relations.
And so has the Trump administration's harsh assessment of European leadership found any support in Europe?
Yeah, for sure. And not just in remote corners. Again, this is the kind of language that borrows from the populist parties that have really surged in recent years. If you look here in Germany, for example, the populist AfD now polling as the most popular party right now and has been for several months. This is the kind of language that they use when we look at the security review, this idea of civilizational erasure, this suggestion that really Europe is dependent on its whiteness to remain the kind of Europe that it has been. So this is not an accident, and in fact the strategy review has said that it would cultivate resistance to these kinds of ideas that it finds so odious in Europe, and with that it obviously means these populist parties. We're already seeing this, in fact, through the likes of individuals such as Elon Musk, such as J.D. Vance, who have openly supported the AfD, the populist party in Germany, or at least called for them to not be excluded from venues where they felt like they were being excluded. And just recently, as we see Musk's response to the EU fine against X, 140 million euros for what it calls non-adherence to some of its new regulations. Musk seemingly agreeing with comparisons between the EU and Hitler Germany. This is only going to further inflame sentiment here and really sort of endanger that kind of relationship.
And so what does this demonstrate about the state of the US-Europe relationship?
Yeah, Joe, I think when you read that full strategy assessment, one thing that you realize is that the U.S. is less interested in values and ideas-based alliances in the past, and perhaps the more pessimistic reading from a European standpoint is that that really is what the relationship, the transatlantic relationship, has turned to in recent years. Even those who are critical of the Trump administration would admit that a lot of the strategic abilities in Europe have really decayed over the decades, over recent decades, and that for an administration that has a very transactional view, then Europe has less use than maybe it has for prior administrations. At the same time, I think there are others who would point to the fact that Trump himself is very transactional and less ideological than the statements in this strategy review would suggest. They see perhaps other viewpoints in the administration that are much stronger and much more adversarial to Europe. And that causes concerns looking at the coming years and the coming administrations ahead.
Okay, Stephen Beardsley there in Berlin. A rare dinosaur fossil known as Spike is about to go under the hammer in London in the next few days, and insiders believe it could sell for more than $10 million. The fossil trade is booming around the world, sparking concerns the key to a scientific breakthrough could be lying untouched in a private collection.
Millions of